Jim? Continue. Okay. Good evening. Yeah, once the public. So good evening. I'm calling to order the Port Orchard City Council work study meeting for July 20th. And this work study session does have one business item. We normally don't take public testimony, but I feel it would be appropriate for the business item if anybody from the public wanted to provide comment on the project on Sydney Avenue, which is for the change orders for. So at this time, I will ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So with that, we have a published agenda this evening, and we have one member of the public here. And Jerry, would you like to provide any comment about the one business item that we're going to act tonight?
To be honest, I haven't seen the agenda, so I don't know
Okay,
what you're talking
the
about.
business item is related to the repairs on Sydney Avenue.
I'm glad that it's being aired.
Us too, and that's why we have the change order. So, Janine, are there any members of the public that would raise their hand and you would acknowledge them and bring them forward to provide testimony on the one business item that we have this evening?
Yeah. I do not see anybody with their hand raised to testify at this time.
Okay, so I will close the public comment period and we will conduct our one business item before we get to our discussion items. And the business item is the adoption of a resolution authorizing temporary amendment of City of Port Orchard procurement policies pertaining to a change order authority for contract number 03621 with ACI for the Sydney Avenue Sewer Repair Construction Project. Mr. Dorsey, this is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Janine, are you picking me up? By resolution number 042-20, Port Orchard City Council adopt procurement policies and procedures for the city's procurement of goods and services to benefit the residents of Port Orchard. At section 7.0 change orders, the city council delegated the signatory authority for change orders for large public works to the department director with a maximum delegated authority of $50,000, and to the mayor with a maximum delegated authority of $100,000, so long as the particular change order did not exceed 10% of either the city council authorized budget or the project or the original contract authorized by the council. For smaller projects, 10% threshold and unintentionally lower the $15,500 cash requiring staff to return to council for certain change orders that are still under these caps. On April 13th, 2021, Port Orchard City Council adopted contract number C036-2 with Apple Construction or ACI for the Sydney Avenue Sewer Repair Construction Project in the amount of $358,358. On July 9th, 2021, the Public Works Department issued the notice to proceed with the project to ACI. On July 13th, 2021, compliance with the city's current procurement policy. The department director executed force account for change directives 1 through 3 in the total estimated dollar amount of $35,000, as this amount is within both $50,000 delegated authority, $50, and under the 10% total contract amount of the project. Once this work is performed and the actual dollar amounts are determined, change order 1 will then be executed by the department director if it does not exceed $35,836. Public Works Department has received a request by ACI for an additional $10,000 in force account or change directive for this project. Considering identifying potential changes and conditions for the project, this project has its time of completion are imperative to the public health and safety. It is anticipated that future change orders may exceed the 10% cap set out by the policies and the $50,000 or $100,000 limit also set out in the policies. Returning to council for approval for this project will result in increased costs in the void. Accordingly, the Public Works Department is requesting a limited waiver of the 10% cap for change orders for the life of this project and an increase in the delegated authority. This will allow the department director to approve up to 85,000 or the mayor to approve up to 135,000 in total contract change order authority without suspending the work needed for council approval. Staff recommends adopting resolution 048-21 temporarily amending section 7 of the city's procurement policy to 1, remove the 10% cap and 2, increase the delegated authority to 85 for the department director and 135 for the mayor to change orders for Sydney Avenue sewer repair construction project.
That's no problem. It is on the table for discussion. To adopt resolution 04821 temporarily amending section 7 of the policy to 1, remove the 10% and 2, increase the delegated authority to 85,000 department director and 35,000 mayor on change orders for Sydney Avenue sewer repair construction project.
Second.
Yeah, I just want to share with the other council finance. Although briefly pass on this one, that's one little. Take over authority. Over 100,000. For increase. The lesser of. And we're going to be bringing some changes to our local policy. Suggest that. Staff here. This motion is specific to the project.
We're very concerned with the $13 million lift station down at the waterfront, $100,000. Be a big rock. We find. Sure. Stop everybody for council.
And I know Mark said that it's not a, motion, and this is for total. For project total that you're being authorized to do.
The project contract right now is $350,000 and change, and you're authorizing a $35,000 work order. And this resets the change order authority to a new 100,000, so that's why it's 135 and 85, which is 50 plus this the 35 of the total problem.
Yeah, for the
Yeah,
total.
for the total-
Yeah,
for the total.
that's what I'm saying. And
So we
so you're, when you're talking about the procurement, the same thing.
Pretty much.
10%, and that makes sense. Yeah.
Or a bigger discussion. Or policy for the concept.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, the 10% in smaller contracts, so I didn't have consequence. We were looking at a Tremont project for 3 years, 15 million. We added 10% to help. We didn't even think at the time for projects under that, that it was actually truncating that value that we picked it up to. Anything under $1 million, we wouldn't get there because it was four. It wasn't a greater amount. It was four, so it was a limiting factor. This was super real. I didn't know what happened.
And then you work. Right.
Especially in this case, where we've got multiple closures, detours, and public information that we're putting out on these. Last thing we want to do is shut everything down for 2 weeks. Wait for a council. Yeah.
Gene, could you do me a favor, if possible, for Jerry's benefit? These side displays, can you put the agenda up on them versus the Zoom meeting, and we'll just have the Zoom meeting on the other TV? Is that possible? And you can work on that, and we'll continue.
Yep, let me try.
So then we have the agenda and maybe the action items on the TVs on the sides.
Thank you.
All new technology, we're still figuring out how to use it all. So, all right, so we have a motion and a second, further discussion of this action item related to the Sydney Avenue project. We're voting on the temporary amendment of the procurement policies related to the Sydney Avenue project. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. So you want to vote? That concludes Passes unanimously and ends our business items. So Janine, you have Mr. Mauer from PSE in the waiting room by chance?
Yes, I am bringing him over right now.
He's gonna share, allow him to share his screen. And he's got a presentation for us.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much again for letting us join you today. I am Matthew Mauer, local government affairs representative for Thurston, Kitsap, and Lewis counties, and my colleague next to me here is Melissa Troy, and she does customer outreach for us. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. A little presentation. Okay, do you guys see my notes or do you see the presentation?
Presentation.
Perfect. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about PSE's Beyond Net Zero Carbon goals related to both CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, as well as just PSE's own climate change initiatives that we have going on. And also at the end, I'm going to have my colleague Melissa talk to you a little bit about our COVID-19 assistance programs that we have currently going on. And also, this is my second time doing this slide as it is, or as this deck as it is right now. And I did practice, but please give me some grace if I do fumble it a little bit. But a little bit overview of PSE. For nearly 150 years, PSE has been the local energy provider for neighborhoods and communities across Washington, 1/3 of all the electric and natural gas energy in our state. As the state's largest utility, our 3,100 employees are proud to keep the lights on and the heat running for more than 1.5 million customers. We continue, as I said before, to support customers impacted by COVID-19, while also continuing to lead on clean energy so that our communities recover. Even more customers can benefit, or so even more customers can benefit from a clean energy future. And so again, those COVID-19 programs you'll learn a little bit more about at the end. This is a quote from our new CEO, Mary Kipp. She understands that our customers want clean energy, and today with this goal and with us going around to different communities, letting everyone know, we're letting everyone know what we're going to be doing. Obviously, we don't have all the answers and how we're going to get there, but we do believe it's possible with the right combination of legislative, regulatory, commercial, and technological advances. And we also know that a lot of important work is ahead of us as we balance our clean energy goals with customer expectation for uncompromised reliability, safety, and affordability. And so I'm going to get into our Beyond Net Zero goal, the 2045 goal. So by 2045, PSE aspires to be a Beyond Net Zero carbon energy company. It is an aspirational but ambitious goal that does support PSE's North Star of being our customers' clean energy partner. Beyond Net Zero means that PSE will reduce our own carbon footprint to net zero, but then we plan to go beyond and help other sectors achieve reductions in their their emissions as well. And just a little definition, net zero is carbon emissions are reduced as much as possible, and then the remaining emissions are 100% offset by either actions or credit, resulting in net zero emissions. Beyond Net Zero Carbon gives us a holistic view that encompasses our entire energy supply, both electric and natural gas, our operations, and the positive impact that we can have on other industries and sectors. We don't have, we have decades of experience. PSE has decades of experience with renewable energy projects, conservation and innovation, and we will leverage all of those, but we are going to need the support and cooperations of key stakeholders like yourself to achieve that success. I'm going to go over the three pathways that we have in our 2045 vision. And so the first is the PSE operations and electric supply. Our mission our commitment is to reduce emissions from PSE electric and gas operations. So that is all of the employees and our buildings and our trucks to net zero by 2030. And by 2045, PSE will have 100% carbon-free electrical supply. And then the next is our natural gas sales for customer end use and in-use carbon emissions. So our aspirational goal for this one is to reach net carbon emissions for natural gas sales by 2045, customer use in homes and businesses, with an interim target of 30% emissions reductions by 2030. And the third pillar here is our beyond PSE reported carbon emissions. Our goal is to partner with customers and industry to identify programs and products that cost effectively reduce carbon across sectors and across our region and state. Examples to include transportation through electric vehicle implementation and the support of low carbon fuels, upstream methane emission reduction. So that may include those from extraction, production, processing, and transportation operations. So as natural gas gets to the customer, there are different steps along the way where methane could leak. And so reducing those methane emissions is something that we can do to help reduce the carbon emissions or the methane emissions, which are sometimes, or not sometimes, are a bigger greenhouse gas than carbon. So reducing those emissions as well. Again, some key support measurements to get us to where we need to go is for instance, efficient siting and permitting of renewable transmission lines and generation. So things that we've come in contact with PSE in general, things that make things more expensive and harder to get through the pipeline. Linking with other Western jurisdictions for a cap and trade program to maximize efficiency for carbon and energy markets. And one that has a consistent regional system that recognizes equity and reliability issues associated with localized carbon regulations. And so the next slide is a little bit hard to digest, especially if you're not right next to the screen. I will have this and I'll send it to Janine afterwards so you guys can look at it. But this is kind of like our pie chart, sort of reduction pie chart thing, where we show all of the things that we're planning on doing via year. So obviously 2021, 2025, 2023. And beyond net zero carbon, it overlays the investments that we know we need to make to comply with the Washington Clean Energy Transformation Act with CETA. But a big difference is that CETA is purely focused on the electric supply. Beyond net zero carbon enables PSE to look holistically across all of our operations, encompassing our natural gas sales, customer end use, and goes beyond, obviously, to reducing emissions in other sectors. PSE will continue to make infrastructure investments that support CETA and modernize the grid, as well as pipeline safety for the foreseeable future, ensuring our energy is delivered safely and reliably. Over the next 2 years, PSE will evaluate additional investments that may support further carbon emission reductions and mechanisms for cost recovery, including implementation of pilots to analyze low carbon fuels, enhancing operational practices such as reducing natural gas blowdowns. And so, for instance, natural gas blowdowns is the release of gas from a pipeline into the atmosphere. And so that's what I was talking about before, the methane leaks in the gas system. Some steps that we're going to be taking now between now and 2045. We will be going coal-free by 2025 in our electric system, and our electric system will be carbon neutral by 2030. Committing to net zero methane emissions in our local distribution system by 2022. Increase of all our alternative fuels for power generation. And we plan on modifying tariffs and incentives to mitigate natural gas load growth, including changes to the line extension policy and appliance incentives. Expand customer programs such as energy efficiency and demand response, paired with increasing utility scale renewables, so solar and wind, and local distributed renewables and associated electric transmission. We do plan on electrifying most of our fleet vehicles by 2030 and use lower carbon fuels for fleet vehicles that can't be electrified and offset the remaining emissions by 2030. let's see. And so last thing here, as part of our aspiring to net zero carbon gas sales by 2045, we do plan on implementing carefully designed statewide policies towards targeted electrification that optimizes existing infrastructure to maximize carbon reduction while mitigating impacts to vulnerable populations. So for instance, hybrid heat pumps that use clean fuels such as renewable natural gas or hydrogen for backup energy in the cold winter months, and then having the normal electric heat pump in the spring, summer, and fall. Let's see, and then this is my last slide before we move on to the COVID assistance really quick. So PSC understands that slowing climate change requires partnership across all sectors. That is why we're building relationships with critical stakeholders as we act to drastically reduce our carbon emissions. As we consider the opportunities to work together on climate solutions and energy, we need to ensure that the solutions pursued improve the livelihoods of all people. PSC understands that climate change is a global problem, but it affects our profoundly local and often refract longstanding patterns of inequality. In Washington state and beyond, low-income residents and people of color shoulder an outside share of climate burden. They often face greater risk from heat waves, floods, and other climate-related impacts, and they have suffered collateral damage from the harmful pollutants produced by using fossil fuels. PSC believes that now is the time for us to make equity a cornerstone of this vision for a greener, livable future. And so it's a big program. There's lots of questions still to be answered and how we're exactly going to get there. But I'm going to have my colleague Melissa talk about our COVID problem, or our COVID assistance program first, and then obviously take some questions after that.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. So we're going to be talking about our income eligible COVID assistance program. We've been able to put together a really robust program in order to help our most energy burdened customers at this point. Next slide. We want to make sure that we're doing what's right for customers. So we have been a trusted community partner and making sure that we're doing what's right for families throughout our service areas. And in 2020, we actually had our original COVID assistance program where we'd made about $9 million in bill assistance available to cover 15,000 customers that were in need, that were clearly focused towards COVID relief in the time of lost jobs, low income, maybe reduced hours. And so we were able to help them to fulfill their bill requirements and ease their burden that they had going on at that time. Next slide. So a couple of quick things to note is that we are continuing our no disconnections for non-payment through September 31st. This is part of a statewide guideline that has been extended a few times. The current guideline is that it will be until September 31st. And that doesn't mean that power is going to be shut off right away at that point. It just means that that's the process in which we're going to start working with customers to make sure that we can keep their power on and that we work with them to make a difference in their utility bills. We're also not going to be collecting any fees. No fees on late payments or deposits for new customers through October 31st as well. So this is really helpful. Again, if people are just a little bit behind at this point, there's no fees that are going to be associated with having to make late payments on their account, and no deposits if customers are having to kind of move or transfer their accounts, especially just during this time when there's a lot of transition happening. We have a ton of bill assistance programs that a lot of people are not familiar with. So besides our COVID assistance programs, we have a budget payment plan so that we can work with customers to figure out a better budget, as utilities tend to be really low prices in summertime. They've got lower bills that they're looking at. And then during those winter months when things start to get a little colder, they're seeing much higher bills. We want to work with them on a budget payment. We also have payment arrangements, low income weatherization, so a free program that will allow for customers to have their homes air sealed, insulation installed, sometimes even replacing refrigerators. And this program is provided through our CAP agencies. In the Kitsap area, it's going to be through like Kitsap Community Resources. And then we also offer an internal program called PSC Help, which can provide assistance for customers if they just contact us and let us know that they've got some income guidelines that they need to meet and that they want to get some assistance from us. Next slide. So we were talking a little bit about how in 2020, we put together that $9 million fund that was available for customers. And we recognize that there's an additional need, especially as there's a large accumulation of accounts that are past due, some 60 days past due, some even just 1 day past due. But as we're starting to see more and more customers were being affected and having past due balances, we wanted to make sure that we were not only preventing disconnection of service once we resume our disconnections, but we also wanted to eliminate them for our income eligible customers to lower their energy burden and prevent credit disconnects, and also just make sure that they've got a really good step going forward. Next slide. So this is a really unique program for PSE. So it's going to provide up to $2,500 per customer per year. So this is an estimated $27 million fund that's available. It'll be available until we run out of funds. So that's why we talk about per year. So for the $2,500, they can apply more than once in a calendar year. If they're behind $500 now, they can apply for that $500 in assistance. If they fall behind again towards the end of the year, they can reapply and get up to that $2,500 in assistance. And then it goes back to zero in the following year. So they can reapply as often as they need, as long as they don't go over that cap. We're providing $20 million for electric customers and $7 million for gas customers. And we actually started this program back in April. We actually looked at all those accounts, saw that there were a lot of past due balances. And if we already knew that they were income qualified based on previous interactions with them, we did automatic bill credits to those customers and let them know via postcards, emails, phone calls, that they were getting this automatic bill credit so that they could have a $0 balance and basically wipe their utility debt free. And then we opened up that public application on May 3rd, which is now available online on our website in multiple languages as well. Next slide. So in regards to who qualifies for this program, we wanted to make sure that we met up with the monthly income requirement. So for an average family of 4, that would be about $52,000 a year would qualify for this program, or $4,417 for a month. But they can go to pse.com/help to learn more about the income requirements. And the great news about this particular program is that when you apply for it, it also will take a look at your application. And if there's other programs that you would fit into within our bill assistance programs, we'll actually kind of put you in contact with the right people so that you can get those additional programs and assistance. Next slide. So you can definitely call our 188 number, or you can go to pse.com/help in order to apply yourself. It really just takes a photo ID and a necessary income documentation to prove that you are income qualified. You can use bank statements or pay stubs, even a letter to indicate that there is a need, and then just completing the application form. So it's a pretty simple application, and we want to make sure that any customer that's in a need of assistance at this point can be able to take care and advantage of this program. Next slide.
That is it.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So thank you again for letting us come and talk to you today. Happy to answer any questions you all have. I will stop sharing my screen.
We'll get to those questions. Nick's been reaching out to me. We're having a little bit of trouble. Folks on the TV are having a little bit of trouble hearing us. So we just make sure when we speak, this is our recording device tonight. So make sure we look that direction and speak. And next work study, I'll try to maybe get that microphone down here. For tonight, at least, if we could just make sure we look that way when we speak and speak clearly and loudly. So questions for Matthew or Melissa? Jay?
You mentioned that the fund was 27 million until it runs out. How much has been used to date?
That's a great question. So far, I believe there's been about $7 million used. That number changes on a daily basis. So last year, we actually had about $11 million in funding, and we only utilized $9 million. So the plan is that it will likely, this fund will be available for more than 1 year. The assumption is that it might be 2 years or more, just depending upon how many people do need to use it at this time.
Thank you.
Great question. Other questions? Thank you, Matthew and Melissa. We appreciate you coming and visiting us and sharing this information tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good rest of your night.
All right, we're on to our second item, which is a water and sewer capital facilities charge exceptions. And so Janine, if you could put up that PowerPoint presentation on the screen, that would be greatly helpful. And maybe move the hand that's in the middle of the screen too. You can see that, but we can't.
You can slide it behind it, she'll go.
I think it's their mouse. They've taken all the remotes and their mouses away from me. I'm having trouble.
All right, so I'll start here. You've got also Nick and Charlie, I believe. And so Janine, can you bring Nick in? And Charlie, I guess.
And Charlie and Jackie.
Jackie, she's there.
You want me to bring Jackie over?
And Nick and Charlie.
Okay, so Nick and Charlie are already in. They just need to show their video. They're available to talk. Let me bring Jackie over.
Jackie can turn her video off if she wants, and then when she wants to speak, turn her video. Any of you guys turn your video on when you want to speak, and then you'll pop up on our screen.
Yeah, so this is a continuation of the water scores section that we talked
You
about.
gotta look that way and talk. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Put your back to us.
no one does. All right, so we talked about.
You have to understand that it's free.
Oh, that might. So the slide presentation should be medium length. I'm going to cover the original. Can you move that big mouse by any chance, Janine?
I think it's this mouse.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
I don't know why it's doing that.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Big mouse. So we're going to look briefly at current tables for the water and sewer CFC exceptions or fees, and then we'll look at the proposals and we'll review some scenarios that we've run through, and then have a brief discussion on it. So as we talked before, the current capital facilities charges are divided up into water residential, water commercial, sewer residential, sewer commercial, with the outlier being water commercial are charged by meter size versus ERUs. So staff and Met talked about this, looked at different scenarios, different analysis of what the change would look like, and we are proposing moving to a simpler structure in one that we're not distinguishing between residential and non-residential art, and applying ERUs to both water and sewer to be consistent. So again, here's what our current table looks like. You can see the meter size for the non-residential, and the sewers are all per ERU currently. And with the change, it would look a lot simpler. We have a per ERU charge for both residential and non-residential. And then as properties develop and change, there would be a calculation to determine what that ERU count was, and we'd simply apply the fee per ERU. We'll come back to the irrigation and have Jackie talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. So the big question became, okay, if we move to ERUs and move off the meter sizes for the water commercial in particular, how do we determine what the ERU is? So staff's proposing that we utilize current consumption data for the most recent 3-year utility billing period. And within that 3-year period, we're going to take the highest 12 consecutive month period to establish the base. And then we'll apply this formula of taking total consumption divided by 180 gallons per day, or excuse me, 180 gallons per day, divided by 365 days per year to get to the total ERU count. We're also proposing rounding these ERUs up to the whole ERUs so that we are not fractionalizing our ERU count. Just based on that, they tend to do that. So then the question became, well, since we're focusing on the 3 years as our period of time to go back and pull the data, that's tied to the retention schedule by the state archivist for utility accounts. So we're working towards getting to be consistent in complying with the state's retention schedule. So we think at some point, I'm sure we will only have 3 years of data as required. So then the question became, well, what if there is no consumption data for this 3-year period? And so our assumption at this point is to assume at least one ERU would be available for this exception. So we had a good discussion about what that meant at the finance committee. And I want to be clear that when we're talking about calculating ERUs, there will be a calculation to determine ERUs, which will determine the charge, the fee that we're going to apply. That calculation also, for certain projects, will determine the amount of exception to that or credit or reduction or that something different. But we're essentially reducing the fee based on the same ERU count. So in this, what if no data for a 3-year period, we're saying we're going to assume that there's at least one ERU of credit or exception available to offset against the new charge. The other piece of the policy discussion was centered on the calculation will be proposed to exclude anomalies such as unusually high consumption levels due to water leaks and or other extenuating circumstances. That happens time to time, that there will be a large water leak. We can see it in the utility data. We have a couple of counties identified where their average consumption was 60,000 per billing period, and water leak could also bumped up to 200 consumption. So that outlier really throws off the amount of total credit that will be available in a redevelopment or mixed-use project. So we're proposing to exclude those anomalies. And then the last policy discussion point was you're proposing that the applicant must maintain a minimum bi-monthly fee consistent with our state practices to be eligible, which means that they need to continue to be connected to the system and charge. So some restaurants or businesses could disconnect from the system, remove the meter, plug up the sewer drain. They are now disconnected from our system. And in the future, if that property does redevelop, then they get the full cost of the fee. But if they maintain that connection, maintain the customer of the city, they would continue to have the credit exception. They'd be eligible for the exception. So Jackie, I'm going to give you a chance to speak to any of those points, if you can hear me.
I can hear you. And I was wondering do you want me to go into the irrigation, or do you want to skip that for now and stick with just these?
No, let's talk these and then talk irrigation, and then we'll move on to the other front footage fee and in lieu of.
Okay, well, I would just like to point out, as I did to the finance committee, that this last point here is pretty important because without a customer or who would have been a previous customer continuing to pay the bi-monthly fee, we have no money to maintain that service connection. And so it would place an undue burden on other active accounts.
Are we really just talking about projects that are sitting, development sitting empty while it's for sales?
That's one, some of the scenarios. Some of the scenarios are just simply redevelopment of site or changing the use of the site.
That's probably one of the biggest that we're anticipating is change of use as.
Mark, you also need to speak. It's weird, I know. They can't hear you.
As you get into the scenarios, you'll see all the scenarios you kind of thought through. But it's both changing use, exceeding use. So Jack, can you speak to the irrigation component? And then I'll.
Absolutely. So am I able to share my screen?
I believe so. Jean, can you enable Jackie to share her screen?
Yes, Jackie, you can share your screen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the actual language that is in the original resolution to exclude irrigation meters from having to purchase, either pay CFCs or purchase a meter. Right here, it says, we're going to waive the connection fee for water systems which do not impact the fire flow storage requirements. So I don't know where that original idea came from, that doesn't affect the storage requirements, because I have whoops, I'm not doing that right. Share screen. There we go. Here is this actual storage components within a reservoir. And this operational storage is where the set point is, and that's where our set points are, where it turns a pump on when it gets this low and turns it back off again. Then we have this equalizing and standby storage. Fire suppression is down here. So I don't understand how, if there's a fire, you're obviously going to use your operational storage first, going into equalizing. And this is like the backup of the backup of the backup, this fire suppression storage. So I don't understand the concept of an irrigation system not affecting fire storage, because the first water used in a fire, like I said, is going to pull all of this water down until you finally get to the fire suppression. I checked with the municipalities and water purveyors around us, City Gig Harbor, Silverdale Water, and West Sound Utility District are the first three that I've checked so far. All of them charge for irrigation meters. So I think we're potentially missing a revenue stream, not a big one. I mean, this doesn't happen often, but we're also, again, placing burdens on those that it shouldn't be. Each person, even if it's an irrigation meter, should be paying their fair share.
For example, earlier this evening, let's say a plat in McCormick Woods where the HOA has areas that have irrigation, that is a meter. That meter has an impact, the water usage has an impact on the water system. They should be paying for connection. Back to you.
I'm gonna walk you through some examples now. Okay. Here's the scenarios we looked at. We looked at the same use, going from a high to a low consumption user. Then we reverse that to go from low to high, and then we bring in our changing of use, residential to commercial. That's the change. Then we topped it off with mixing use of residential and commercial, all in the same location. This first scenario we're looking at, our example is a large restaurant becoming an office space, a 4-unit suite. You see in the first column there, the calculated current. So we would calculate based on the utility data that they're currently using 5 ERUs. When they submit their application for this new office suite, identify that they actually only need 4 ERUs, 1 per unit. You can see it's a reduction of ERUs. You see the available credit or exception that would be available to them, the new charges and fees, and then the net change. And again, with our code, there is no refund, so there'd just be no charge under this scenario. The next scenario, move from a low to a high consumption. Again, commercial. You have an office space of 2 units, so you see 2 ERUs, again, 1 ERU per unit. Moving to a large restaurant, that's how we calculated the potential ERU use. And you see it's an increase of 2 ERUs with the credits being applied, the new charge, and the net now change, which would result in a payment of roughly $22,000 for water and $24,000 for sewer. The next example is the single family becoming a office 1 unit. In this example, the single family represents 1 ERU, and the office unit is 1 unit is 1 ERU. So net is 0 credit for charge, nothing charged, nothing refunded, so no change. Next example, that single family residence is changed into a small restaurant. So again, we started with 1 ERU that we calculated. The application then demonstrates that 3 ERUs would be necessary, increased by 2 ERUs. Again, you see the net change, and there would be a fee for the water CFC as well as the sewer. This is an example, and as well as the last one, of changing use. So, Councilmember Dean asked about this examples. So originally it was commercial, now we're changing the use, going from a residential to commercial. In our current code, we can't really provide the language and changing it as such and how we apply it. With our proposal, that's how it will play out. Another change in use example is a commercial moving to a residential, so a large box store, 20 apartment units. Originally, the calculated Your history demonstrated 2 ERUs were being utilized. The new application required 1 ERU per apartment. Net increase of 18 ERUs. Again, you see the credits being available, the new charges, as well as the net change combined. So roughly $208,000 for water, $218,000 for sewer. So now we're moved to the mix. So those are all changes. One residential, residential. Now we're saying there's a building, a commercial building that's going to become both a commercial and residential building. So this example, we're looking at a large restaurant that, again, 3-year data will demonstrate 4-year use have been utilized. So that's what's going to be available for the credits. And they are designing a building that's going to have a small espresso bar with approximately 40 units of apartments. See there, we got 1 ERU for the espresso bar and 40 ERUs for each apartment unit. This is an increase of 37 ERUs. Again, you see the net change and the resulting fees and charges and revenue to the city of $428,000 for the water CFC and $448,000 for the sewer CFC. So I'll pause there because I think that's our last example. Yeah. So we can open up for discussion. Those are kind of the net results of going with the proposal as is and changing the total language to allow for that flexibility to mix, change use, and go away from this distinction between residential and water. So that's where I want to pause and see if you guys have any questions on this stuff, and then ask them to talk a little bit more on first ADU and accessory.
Yeah, just real quickly, a lot of our other fees, we've started tying into account for inflation. And we have the same type of increase based on inflation here, or is this something that we'll be revisiting, every so often?
So our current
Yeah,
water,
it does.
the current code for water CFC does have a provision to adjust for CPI each October, unless there's a change in the last 6 months prior to that. So for this year, we'll change the sewer based on CPI, and will not change the water. Next year, and that's on the charge side. Right. So my assumption would also adjust the credit as well. We're counting ERUs, applying the credit based on the charge itself.
So the calculation is on the ERU, and this is the methodology for making, showing what ERU values are, and cleaning up the code. So it's straightforward and easily to understand, easier to understand.
Essentially, the value of those credits, the formula. What the results of that.
Yeah, and that I get. My other question is on ADUs, and I'll wait for Nick to.
Nick's about to get us.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I heard the word ADU mentioned, and I want to go step back just one level, which is accessory uses in general. And our current code really isn't clear on how we handle accessory uses, and it isn't totally clear whether an accessory dwelling unit is the same as a dwelling unit in terms of administering the capital facility charge for both water and sewer. Other examples of accessory uses that we typically see in a residential setting are home businesses, home occupations. We also have daycares for up to 6 children that can be within somebody's home. And so in those instances, we have not been charging an additional connection fee when somebody establishes a home business or a daycare, but our policy has been to charge for connection fees for accessory dwelling units. So as we are looking at amending this section of our code, I think there's an opportunity to clarify and sort of reinforce our policies as it relates to accessory uses within a home or a dwelling unit. The proposal that we shared with the Finance Committee earlier tonight, and which we are recommending, would clarify that accessory uses, when they're lawfully established, would not trigger the payment of a capital facility charge unless, and there's a couple of sub-bullets here. So the first one is, if you're talking about an accessory dwelling unit, as long as it is not on its own meter and is less than 1,000 square feet or 40% of the size of the primary house, whichever is less, those accessory dwelling units would not pay a connection fee. Likewise, if you have a home occupation, a home business, a home daycare, those would also not pay a additional capital facility charge unless those uses were expected to generate more than 1 ERU's worth of demand for water. So we're proposing to insert that language in the code. The Finance Committee did have a little bit of discussion about the size of an ADU and in terms of what ADU would be considered under the umbrella of the primary dwelling versus what the threshold would be before that unit has to pay an additional connection charge. And the recommendation from the Finance Committee members was to match the policy to our land use code, which caps the size of an accessory dwelling unit at 1,000 square feet or 40% of the size of the principal dwelling. So that's the recommendation, but I would encourage the full council to have a little bit of discussion on that point and make sure that you guys are all on the same page and can support that if that goes into the draft ordinance. And if there's anything else you have questions on concerning accessory uses, I'm happy to answer those.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Nick, does the 1,000 square feet, does that apply to the lesser of the two? Is that how that works? 1,000 or the 40% of?
Correct. Yes. So if you have a 2,000 square foot house, you only get an 800 square foot ADU. And so because if it's over those thresholds, it becomes a second home on your lot as opposed to an accessory dwelling unit. And then you have other land use requirements such as subdividing the property or applying to convert that to a different type of residential unit.
And Nick, do accessory dwelling units in the city include what other jurisdictions call mother-in-law apartments or accessory living quarters? Is that?
So in our land use code, we have accessory dwelling units, and then there's another building type called a backyard cottage, which can contain an accessory dwelling unit. So it's an accessory dwelling unit, whether it's attached or detached, and you have to get that permitted through DCD.
Okay, thank you.
County has an ADU and an ALQ, but the ALQ is in the house.
Yeah, there's a-
ADU is outside.
Attached.
It's comfortable with those thresholds
Yeah.
which are consistent with our code. Now they're in our areas, so. Okay. Anything else on this matter?
Yeah, Jackie, can you talk a little bit about and bring this up because with the guidance here tonight, we'll start drafting language to propose next year. So,
Yes. You want me to talk about in lieu of assessment versus front footage? Was that what you wanted me to speak on, Noah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I thought I had a graphic here, but for some reason my graphics keep disappearing. So right now the code says that we are going to charge in lieu of assessment charge for property fronting on a water main, and that's really a misnomer. So what Charlie and I worked together to do was change that language from in lieu of assessment to front footage, because that's really what we're talking about, a front footage charge rather than an in lieu of assessment charge. And in lieu of assessment comes into play when a property does not front on a water or sewer main. And if there are instances, and I had one to show you, I showed it earlier, but some reason my graphics keep leaving. Anyway, an instance where there's a lot that's one lot off of a water main and there's no other water near there. So they're requesting that we provide them service, and they are in our retail service area. So rather than have a 8-inch water line, which is what the minimum size is, run for a single family residence, what we do is set the meter out at our water main and let them run a line back to their house across an easement between two other properties. And that's actually an in lieu of assessment. And Charlie and I have worked together to put together an agreement that that people would sign. It then gets recorded with the county auditor. It then gets are you okay? It then gets recorded with the county auditor assessor's office, so that in the future, if a water main does go by there, or sewer, if that happens to be the case, then what would happen is those people are required to financially participate in the cost of that water main or sewer main, whatever the case may be. It's filed on the property so that it stands in perpetuity, so that if they sell it, it's still there. And what it does is, if a developer comes along, then the developer, whether it's through a latecomer agreement or whatever, has the opportunity to certify their costs to us and get paid back for the cost going across those people's property.
Right. Got that, no protest.
To some degree, yeah, other than there's the tying with other groups like lake covers and things of that nature that are binding, so. And we've got an example that's going in right now on Bethel, right there, below Novus, where we're going to be connecting a future coffee shop with the service, but if the water main is built, then theoretically, you know, at that point with this fee in lieu of, they'll have to connect, because the spring, they'll have to connect to that main and then resolve if the person that puts in that main actually puts in a late numbers, then that makes it pretty clean. He's got to pay the late numbers, but otherwise we'll have to set the gate off. It should be some sort of a credit model or something that will capture that. So you guys just approved one for the
Helpline.
Helpline Mitchell, where they connected from down below on Spiral Hill. When somebody extends that main, they just sign it.
So we've actually executed one. We have 2 more requests for them. There's something that don't happen very often, but we just thought it should be in the code.
The main thing is it's always been problematic, called cumulative assessment, because that's a different thing. It's like a lot of people think that the latecomers is being, you know, is a different thing. It's kind of like terminology. So we're going to clean it all.
Yeah, this may go back to Nick, and I'm not quite sure who, but how does this work then for back to words, complex on DeKalb at the church, where it's going to be for lack of better words, more of a communal system bathroom, like every apartment is not going to have its own facility. Is that just based on usage then?
Are you talking about the exemption?
The ERU.
Yeah, the exemption, not in the.
Yeah, the exemption. So you got a church and now they're gonna do 8 apartments in there. So it was just a math formula in that.
Okay, so we run the same way regardless of the fact of how many bathrooms or. It's going to be based on usage then.
They're gonna tell us how they're gonna use it, and then Noah's code will have a math equation that will figure that out.
Okay, that makes sense. So
We'll have consumption and look at where.
that's what I'm saying.
They'll
Yeah.
have a proposal that's better than you.
Thank you.
That's what we're trying to make it is clear cut. It's a math equation and there's no real interpretation. Okay. All right.
That was the one off that I could think of.
And I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. We'll see how this works for me.
Okay, thanks, guys.
And so the next item is mine. It's the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA. And it is these high court, AWC put on at the conference, a session on these. And so there was way more information and I only captured the things that I felt would be relevant to our Port Orchard and how we could deploy our dollars. And I've had knowing I had a meeting with the county and how they intend to deploy their dollars. I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. But so these are the high points. We will receive, initially we thought we were going to receive $3.2 million because we were a non-entitlement city, but we've grown up. And the math formula for an entitlement city only gives us 2.8 million. So entitlement city gives us direct access to the CBDG money and part of how I have the seat at the executive board at KRCC, but in this scenario, it didn't help us. And so we have more reporting requirements than a non-entitlement city, and we got a little less money. But we'll be receiving 2.8 million, and it's in 2 equal installments, one now and one next year. And we got the first installment a couple of weeks ago, first $1.4 million. Capital expenditures must be spent by 2026. Program funds, if we do a program, it must be spent by 2024. And some of these are just bullet points. There's caveats for economic harm, which is aid to households and businesses and nonprofits. Local fiscal recovery, which is households, in particular utility assistance, and business recovery is also utility assistance, is a way we can spend these money. What Noah and I learned early on in a prior session that we were on, unfortunately, unlike the CARES money, where we were able to contract with somebody and they administered it for us, we can't hire staff or pay anybody to spend these monies. So we would need to hire a staff person if we wanted to do a program. We have to use our own local dollars to pay that staff person. We could not use the ARPA dollars to pay that staff person. So there's also an option for lost local fiscal recovery, which would be our sales tax dollars. If we've lost sales tax dollars last year, we could put those directly into our bank account. As you all are aware, we didn't have any losses last year. And unfortunately, this is one of the things I advocated for AWC, was to include revenue utility accounts in that. And when the legislation was written, it does not include our utility accounts. We do have lost revenue there from non-payment customers. Where we know we can spend money is water and sewer infrastructure. And projects must be eligible to receive financial assistance through EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Fund or Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And all of our projects are eligible for those, so we don't have any concerns there. In particular, we can spend money to protect bodies of water from pollution, improve drinking water infrastructure, and consolidation of drinking water systems. And so we currently have 2 water systems, the McCormick system and the downtown system. And we have a project in our capital facilities plan to tie that we don't have funded yet to intertie those 2 systems. We could also spend money for cybersecurity needs, but we haven't identified any cybersecurity needs for utilities. So unallowable uses include payments of loans, replenishment of reserves, and non-federal grant matches. The reporting requirements are records must be retained for 5 years after the last expenditure. Quarterly reports are due 30 days after the end of the quarter. Annual reports are due July 3rd, as of July 31st, to October 31st. And if we'd have been still a non-entitlement city, we just had to do an annual report. So that's gonna we should, because of reporting requirements, probably limit the number of things we're gonna put these into, because it increases the burden for reporting if we've got multiple ways of spending the money. Not saying we should, so right now we have $1.4 million in hand. And I'm talking to staff, we believe our best options are, we've got the well 11 construction that's likely going to start next year. We have a marina pump station project that's going to go out to bid, and we have funding for these, but we don't have identified funds for cost overruns. So as we get into these projects, it might be nice to have some of these funds held in reserve to potentially help pay for cost overruns on these projects that potentially happen. We could do a utility grant program, but for consumers or small businesses. But as I spoke to, we would have to administer that ourselves and pay for that with our general fund dollars. Our recommendation is to spend roughly $500,000 and hire a design firm and design the Old Clifton intertie and a booster pump station. That will take us a year or more to get that design done. And then at that point, we'll have the second installment of dollars and figure out where it makes sense to do we then move forward with the construction. We should have enough money for the construction for that intertie, or potentially put funds into either one of those large capital projects if we all of a sudden find ourselves short on one of those two projects. So we've got some time, but I'd like to work towards deploying at least 500,000 of this into a design. Nothing else. We compete much better for grants when we have a design sitting on a shelf, and if nothing else, we advance the design that we would have to shop for grants if we spent these on cost overruns for those large capital projects. Kitsap County, when we met with them, they have $53 million, and they met with us talking about partnering with them. And I think they're going to struggle to spend $53 million. I don't think they help us spend our money. So, and based on our conversations, the county is not looking at any sort of capital needs like we are. They're going to try to deploy most of these dollars to economic services and economic recovery, which is great. It's needed out there. They seemed surprised when we told them they didn't believe us that they can't spend these dollars though for the staff to administer that. So they're looking into that. But it's pretty clear to Noah and I that you can't. So we'll see if the county reconsiders that or not. But there's
these dollars definitely cannot go for transportation.
they did not. There were many cities asking. Yeah, and it would have been potentially nice for us. And there were mayors asking for that when I was on the call to White House staff for that. And they, what was interesting too is there was mayors from throughout the country, and there's governors in conservative states that aren't allowing the money to come to their state, and so then their cities aren't getting it. This is quite fair. But and then lastly, there's a chart here. This is what came from us from the county. It's in your packet, and it just shows all the things that the county is considering on spending these dollars for with their $50. Go ahead, John.
Well, first off, I think the concept of designing what the better we can position the city for shovel ready projects, the better. Especially if we're going up and a lot of construction. But so I think that it helps. The other question I would have is talk about for is for eligible for stormwater.
It likely could be. It isn't as clear because it does speak to protecting bodies of water, but it isn't called out the same way sewer and water is.
What I was thinking is that we recently acquired some property for the county that, yeah, I don't know if we're in a position yet to do it like for a water system that could utilize that.
We didn't talk about Bethel, but we did talk about another original piece of property that we were, and that could be an option. use funds to buy that piece of property. We're just, you know, the challenge is I'd rather not be in the gray because these federal monies, all of a sudden, we got turned into a very short-term loan that's due tomorrow. And when we get it wrong, after we've spent it and, we get our audit years, a couple of years down the road and you didn't get that right. So,
And the other point of that is the money's going to be spent one way or the other. And if the project that the mayor's talking about to purchase the property, the 500,000 intertied to sign, just freeze $500,000 up for us, so.
We'll get it. Getting the city position
True.
to be for additional
So-
funding, so we've got a stormwater utility. Figure out how that, water system. Talking about the site there. Those are the kind of things that. Once that closer
I think step one is we just want to deploy this first bite of this, evaluate other options, and the stormwater is something that Noah and I discussed. We're just not 100% certain on it, and I want to be 100% certain.
clearly we have the time.
We do.
So.
So we'll get this design done, look at these other big capital projects that we know are underway, and hopefully we don't have any surprises. And if we don't, then let's look for the next opportunity and how we spend those on the next capital project. Let's finish the ones that we know we got to start here in the next year or two. Jay?
I understand why we, not allocating funds for individuals or for businesses. I mean, it makes perfect sense. We want to maximize the use of these dollars. And that we spend share dollars on businesses and not individuals. I was just wondering if you had any anecdotal information you were to know of on how our businesses and individuals have it with Apple utility fees and such items. Because the people I've talked to, they utilize the money, but nobody's, excuse the expression, screaming right now. And so I was just wondering, how are city businesses and individuals doing?
You know, I can't speak to, I know we had a couple $100,000 in delinquent utility accounts, but I don't know breakdown between commercial and residential.
Business in particular.
Yeah, we pulled them total. We didn't get different. And the beauty of spending is on our utility, if we put this in investment into our utility accounts, it allows us to, it benefits everybody equally. And it prevents us from, we're always going to have to, unfortunately, things are going to cost more and connection charges and rates go up. And we can minimize that by putting these dollars into these capital projects and potentially not have to raise them as much.
Yeah. And I know we've been working with our customers. I know that, I know that from the information you give us. I just want to make sure that we're still doing it for businesses and individual families that we can, even though these dollars are elsewhere. That's all. I just was wondering how we were.
And we were talking about this finance too. There's definitely winners and losers in this. And our local economy is very robust. Retail sales are the biggest driver in our increases in sales tax revenue. And the restaurant industry is hopping, but gosh, our bowling alley, our movie theater. I talked to my dry cleaner, we're not going to the office as much. I wore a shirt and tie today, but it might be once or twice a week instead of 5 days a week, and I think we're all in that. When working from home, we're not wearing a tie and probably a polo shirt, so we don't take those things to the dry cleaners. So there's businesses out there that still are struggling and suffering, and that we're haven't fully recovered the way others have, and so.
Was there any discussion about climate resiliency projects or?
Not even. Because their legislation was pretty
I support the approach that you got.
So Jackie, you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so now you got to procure a project. An engineer.
Sorry, I'm what? I didn't hear that.
You procure an engineer tomorrow.
I'm not an engineer, but
Design an intertie.
yes, we need to have an engineering firm under contract. We'll have to do the bidding process to get an engineering firm to design the intertie. Yes.
That was my tongue-in-cheek way of saying that.
Okay.
So staff did get some more work out of this. Way to go, Jackie.
Well, and we also, just in case, I'm not privy to all your meetings, but we also have 7 applications into the Public Works Board for loans for other low-interest loans for other public works project also. So if we come through with even half of those, plus this ARPA money, plus the emergency Pottery Avenue fix, we're going to be really busy.
The Cedar Heights station that's falling apart.
Oh, I missed that.
Yep.
Video was good. I remember that one.
All right, that's it for this. And now Charlie and the chief.
And I do want to report that we have received the first,
Yeah.
so there is the next tranche. We already have received cash.
Are we keeping them all separate
Yeah.
items?
Yeah.
And if that makes interest, there's interest on that,
Oh, yeah.
then.
Yeah, 0.0001.
That's right. I know.
Same, we're all getting some extra.
Access.
Okay. So, well, I don't want to sour this, but there's some changes that have happened at the legislature, and a number of bills related to police reform passed this last session and go into effect next week. And so we want to share that. This is our opportunity to share that information with the community as our policing practices and tactics change. So, Chief.
Correct. Thank you. I'm going to face this way. Well, no disrespect if you're watching from the backside of me, I'll just raise my hand. So these are your 2021 Washington legislative updates. There are 13 major ones. We're going to talk about the legislative updates that the community is going to see and feel the most. So this is House Bill 1054. It's the tactics bill, or also known as the police tactics bill. This goes into effect Sunday, July 25th. What it does is it prohibits chokeholds and neck restraints in any circumstance. Our police department has always prohibited chokeholds. We did use vascular neck restraints in the past. No one in our department is currently trained in that, and we did remove that as a technique last year. House Bill 1054 is in opposition to House Bill 1310, which states that you can use any methods in deadly force. This creates a circumstance where you cannot use these type of restraints to save your own life or the life of another. We'll see where that goes. It prohibits no-knock warrants. I can tell you in 22 years of law enforcement in this state, I have never experienced a no-knock warrant. I've never seen any agency use a no-knock warrant. We are required by the law to state who we are, why we are there, and what we would like the occupants of any building or structure to do. And then we have to wait a reasonable amount of time for them to react to that. We are waiting for them to come open the door for us. Operationally, this changes nothing for us. Prohibits firing at a moving vehicle, although there are exceptions. Vehicles are not assumed to be a deadly weapon just by definition, but if the driver is using that vehicle as a deadly weapon, that changes the circumstance. While we recognize that using firearms to try and stop a vehicle, even if we stop the driver, doesn't necessarily stop that vehicle. This is something that may need to be used to preserve life. And finally, it significantly restricts vehicle pursuits. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So our current practice is that we utilize vehicle pursuits to apprehend suspects for all types of criminal behavior, whether that be for crimes against persons, crimes against society, crimes against property, traffic offenses. But as we move into this new era of of policing, the legislature has made it very clear that we are moving on to a different approach. So moving forward, beginning on Sunday, July 25th, there's a couple ands and ors. So in order for law enforcement to pursue a vehicle for a number of offenses, we require probable cause for either the driver or a passenger in that vehicle. And probable cause means we can arrest them for a violent offense or a sex offense. And they are very, very specific. And I have not listed them out here, but they are very, very violent offenses for homicide, for vehicular assault, for drive-by shootings. Some crimes that one would think is a crime of violence do not raise up to that level. And an example of that would be a simple assault involving a domestic violence scenario. That does not count as a violent offense under the new law. We would also require probable cause for an escape. That escape is from a facility, not from in custody. If we take someone in custody and they flee from us. Or we can use reasonable suspicion if we have a vehicle that we believe to be with a driver that is under the influence of either narcotics or alcohol. And there's a lot of articulation that will be needed to be done with both of those. So probable cause or reasonable suspicion, and there's some additional requirements. So the pursuit is necessary for the purpose of identifying or apprehending the person. So if we don't know who it is, that's different than if we do know who it is. We also have to be able to articulate at the time that the person poses an imminent threat to the safety of others, and that risk of that imminent threat is greater if we allow that person to escape than the risk to the community of that pursuit. And we'll talk about imminent threat and imminent threat of bodily injury throughout. In addition to those requirements, and this does affect our department as we're a little smaller, all pursuits shall receive supervisory authorization, and all pursuits shall have supervisory control. What that means is if we do not have a sergeant on duty, we will not pursue anyone for any reason, which is concerning. Again, we want to keep people safe, but if we need to stop and not try and save someone's life and call, that's just going to delay a response. We'll still do the right thing, and we will still follow the law, but there may be a delayed response. So what does this mean for our community? With that reduced ability to pursue criminals, we have a reduced ability to apprehend criminals. And that may be reflected in how our crime rates go, but that is yet to be seen. It also limits our ability to enforce traffic crimes. We will continue to go back. We will continue to enforce traffic. That is a goal of ours, is to make sure that the motoring public and the pedestrians that mingle with vehicles are safe, but this may limit our ability to stop high-profile offenders. So House Bill 1310 is the use of force bill that also goes into effect on July 25th. So this Sunday, our current practice is that officers shall only use that amount of force that reasonably appears necessary, given the facts and circumstances perceived by the officer at the time of the event, to investigate, which is an important distinction, or enforce criminal law. That's our current practice. So this bill changes when force may be used, and it changes how force may be used. So moving forward this Sunday, force can only be used when necessary to protect against criminal conduct when there is probable cause to make an arrest or to effect an arrest. So using probable cause means I have 51% belief that you have done something and that we are going to take you into custody, and that's how you were introduced to the criminal justice system. Effecting an arrest means that there's a warrant signed by a judge, and we are to take you into custody and present you to that judge. Moving forward, those are the only, that's a circumstance where you can do it. However, we cannot use force to investigate potential criminal conduct. That is a significant change, and that is a significant operational effect on how we may investigate those where we have a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. But as we've said, we follow the law, and this is what the legislature has asked us to do.
Can you give us a better an example of that distinction right here that we just talked about?
So if we respond to a call of a burglary and we have it's from an alarm company, which would not be the victim of the crime, that we would need to speak to the owner of the building. The alarm company calls up and says, Jerry's got her sea legs under her, and we can see her in there, and please go stop her. And we see her running, because like I said, she has legs on you. We see her running. I do not have probable cause to arrest her because I have not spoken to the owner of that building to be assured that Jerry isn't in there by my permission, or it's an accident, or she's starting her marathon. Therefore, I cannot use force to detain her. I can ask her politely, but I cannot make her stop. In addition to that, we can prevent an escape, as discussed very similarly under vehicle pursuits. And we can use force to protect against the imminent threat, bodily injury to a peace officer, another person, or the person against whom force is being used. And this is an important distinction because, again, if there's no criminality in an act, and this does not allow for an individual to create an imminent threat of bodily injury to themselves, there's a significant number of the population who need our help that we may not be able to aid. So the bottom line is this: when necessary means that we shall exhaust all reasonable alternatives to force before using an arrest or to prevent imminent bodily injury. This may reduce the amount of time it takes, this may increase the amount of time it takes for us to respond to a call, and it may increase the amount of time that we stay on a call before we take an action. We need to wait because we need to bring our backup. Part of de-escalation is often bringing extra bodies with us, extra police officers, so that as we engage with subjects, we can keep them safe. And we have found that bringing numbers also reduces the likelihood that there will be a force situation. However, what that may mean is that the public calls for assistance, and we aren't there as quickly as we should be, because we cannot be. We need to use our de-escalation techniques, such as time, space, and cover, and more conversation. So something that may happen inside of a business or inside of a home may take significantly longer, and that may affect the ability of the public to do the things that they would like to do. So if there's an issue that occurs in a restaurant that maybe we could have resolved in 5 minutes if we were to use force, we need to exhaust all reasonable alternatives, which may mean that we're there for an hour talking to this person, and that may create disruption to that community. But again, the legislature has been very clear that we need to slow down and do more de-escalation. Because of this, we may also need to disengage and allow the person to get away rather than using force, even if we have the ability to arrest them. Because we need to look at the totality of the circumstance. So if we have the ability to arrest the finance director for stealing a candy bar, and we go and we say, you're under arrest for stealing a candy bar, and he would like to fight with us, we need to weigh whether or not we really need to fight with the finance director in order to take him into custody for a piece of property. And that also makes us consider, what is the value of property? If property is just a thing, and maybe we need to again look at the totality of that. And that's something that we'll be learning and experiencing together as a community as we move forward with this new legislation. Thank you. So, yes, if you share it, you share it. So this also will deeply affect how we respond to community members that are asking for welfare checks on family members. It'll affect how we encounter people with behavioral health or codependent issues. The legislature has been incredibly clear that if there's no criminal activity that is alleged, and there's no imminent threat of bodily harm to others, we should not be attending to those incidents. We do not have the legal authority moving forward after the 25th to use force to detain anyone suffering from behavioral health issues under the Involuntary Treatment Act. It's not illegal to have behavioral health issues. It's not illegal to want to kill oneself, and we are being removed from those circumstances. As much as we have a servant heart, and that's why I've got it in red there, as much as we want to help, we can't go because we are being told that we need to have other resources go. And we're working with other members of the community, and we're working with other agencies within the community to try and figure that out. So what we will do is evaluate each call individually. We are not going to just not respond, but we may respond by phone. We may respond in person if it's appropriate, but we're going to gather information over the phone first. We'll likely call you back and see if we can simply make a referral. Because sometimes people in crisis may need to just be alone. And as much as we want to be there to help them, it may be more appropriate to leave them home alone or in another circumstance, but it may not be appropriate without allegations and articulated criminal activity or an imminent threat of bodily harm to other people. It may not be appropriate for us to go. So we'll be making our referrals to the designated crisis responders. It gets at mental health. And your department has a community health navigator that, again, navigates people through that referral process to try and get them to treatment and to try and get them to services. But there may be difficulties when the public calls and asks for the police to come, because we are the ones that work 24 hours a day. And an example that I would give is, I'm going to pick on the finance director again. Finance director calls up and says, my brother lives in Port Orchard and we talk every Friday. I haven't heard from him in 3 weeks. Can you please go check on him? Our answer is, moving forward, is likely going to be no. There's no criminal activity. If there's a medical issue, that's a fire department problem. And I can tell you that I have a personal experience responding to a similar call. And it turns out that the brother and the other brother were in an argument and they didn't want to talk to each other. And he opened the door with a shotgun. So I have personal experience as to why maybe we shouldn't be going to these things, because that could have ended very tragically. But we can do what we can if there are legitimate medical issues to try and have the fire department go. But again, they are emergency services. They are not standard services. This is also a big change. Runaways and status offenders. Status offenders have been designated by the court as at-risk youth. And historically, we've been able to detain children to keep them safe. And we either get them to services and get them to guardians and parents, or get them out of the circumstance that they're in so that we can help them. However, because being a runaway and being an at-risk youth is not a crime, we cannot use force to detain them, which means I can't stop them from leaving. Excuse me. So what we have done in the past is, if I pick up your 15 or 16-year-old child and say, I have Johnny, would you like to come pick him up? We usually get a response time of, I'm in Tacoma, I'll see you in an hour. So we go buy him a cheeseburger, we bring him into our office, we put him in front of Netflix, and we sit there, and then mom shows up and everyone's reunified. Moving forward, when we pick that child up, at any point, if that child, no matter how old, wishes to leave, I cannot use force to detain him. I cannot stop him, I cannot lock him inside anywhere. The child is allowed to leave.
Regardless of age.
Regardless of age. I cannot use force unless I can explain imminent threat of bodily harm. So if it's a 6-year-old child or a 4-year-old, I think that's a lot easier to explain it. That child may run into a busy street. But if it's a 15-year-old kid that just wanted a cheeseburger and wanted to watch Star Wars on Netflix and now he wants to leave, we have to escort him outside. This is the Blake decision was an earlier decision by the Washington State Supreme Court. That found that the simple possession charge for narcotics was unconstitutional. Basically, what they said is we need to make sure that if there's that charge, you need to be able to show knowledge and intent. The legislative fix that was put in immediately when this came into effect a few weeks ago is that before we can make an arrest for the possession of narcotics, we now have an unfunded mandate to refer all narcotics possession suspects to treatment at least twice prior to making an arrest. Unfortunately, no such referral system or treatment process was established under that bill. And we are trying to figure out what that means and how we can address that. The hope is that we can have something at least countywide where if a suspect is referred twice in Poulsbo, we'll know about it and we can then arrest them, because oftentimes, at least in the current system, in order for persons to be mandated to go to treatment, it has to go through the criminal justice system. So again, without having that set up, we don't have an umbrella or any way to catch these people that do really truly need help. But we are working on that and hopefully we'll be able to regionalize that. So without any other questions, yes, sir.
So will there be a process, I have a couple of questions, to evaluate whether appropriate force was used? in an arrest. And let's say that it was determined somehow that excessive force was used, or force should not have been used. What's our liability to that? Does that person get to go free? Does that person have a claim against the city? What does that look like?
Well, I would certainly refer any liability questions to the city attorney, but what I can tell you is we do have a process. We review all uses of force, beginning at the supervisor level to the deputy chief, and then I sign off on it. We look to see if we have followed policy, and sometimes we may make an error, sometimes we may, was it a mistake of the head or a mistake of heart, right? And so we have to look at that and see what would be an appropriate response. If there's an excessive force incident that is, we investigated and find that is legitimate. On that.
For a while.
Who
Whoever was arrested.
Well, that's a separate issue. So we review use of force incidents internally. The crime that they would be arrested for, that was arrested for justice. The state now, under a different bill that I didn't have up there, has the ability to do their own investigations to decertify a police officer outside of whatever the city or my department is.
Charlie, do you have an answer for the legal risk question if we run afoul?
I can't answer that in an open public meeting, but I'm happy to have a conversation with the council member offline under privilege. But I think the chief did a good job of summarizing from a procedural standpoint how the city addresses this, and the city already has the practices in place for analyzing use of force incidents and for documenting and memorializing that analysis. So we're using a process that's already in place and applying it to these new sort of expanded rules.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Chief, a couple things. So if I'm at home, my wife calls, and I'm threatening to commit suicide, leaving you out of this though, and you too, Jared. And so I mean, and you're basically not going to respond. You're going to talk to her, and even if you did respond, you couldn't use force to stop it.
Correct. So what is, and again, I can't give a what if on every scenario, but something is that basic level of information. You would speak with your wife. She's safe, she's not at home, you're at home by yourself. You're only creating risk to yourself, but you can't, under the new law, you can't create an imminent threat of bodily injury to yourself. We might call you, hey, would you like to go to the fire department, to go to the hospital? And if you say no, that's it. That's pretty much it. And it becomes more and more difficult when we start talking about this. So when we know that we have downtown, if you were to do that downtown, have a solution that resolves things quickly. Because you don't risk yourself.
Second thing is, that, as you pointed out, this is legislative, that's signed by the governor. I'm sure the police have a lobbying. Were you guys at the table for this?
I was not personally. No. I mean, I certainly can't speak to some of our organizations, and we have walk ops, which is I don't have to remember that. We also have WASP, which is the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. I don't know how much they were involved. There are certainly some concerns that I think that every law enforcement agency in the state shares with some of these and some of the confusion. Our hope is, again, we work within the law, so it's very, very helpful for us to have bright black and white lines, because we work out in the field with gray. We have solid uprights, so we know where we're bouncing off of. It makes it easier for us to work in uncertain circumstances. Going into uncertain circumstances with uncertain laws, it makes it difficult sometimes. Yes.
Some of these are sound open-ended. We don't know what the consequences are going to be.
Correct.
Thank you.
I can speak to it from the Association of Washington Cities, they're lobbying on this, and while we recognize the intent, what the intent was, what some of these bills looked like early on in the legislative process was far worse.
Will there be,
And to speak to that, if you don't mind, sir, the other thing too is that it's not our job to judge intents. We have to, no different than you as elected providers. I can't guess what we meant. We take the words on a piece of paper and that's what we do. And while we certainly believe that there's some intent there that may not look the same on a piece of paper, so there's a legislative fix, we need to follow exactly what is written in these laws. Thank you, Chief. Yes, sir.
I just was curious about a description of the challenges of, for lack of a better description, deprogramming your staff who had SOPs for years and now have to think entirely different about situations.
That is absolutely true. I mean, I've been in the business for 22 years and I can tell you that these are things that are hard for me to wrap my brain around. I get addressed like them, but I'm your chief executive and I spend my time here and they spend their time out in the field. We've had as many conversations that we can have. There's still some concern. We joke about it, say you go back to lizard brain, because you go to what you know, go to what you trained at, and go to what you experience, and this is no less than the ground really truly shifting under our feet. So what we've been speaking to a lot is you need to slow down, take your time, really evaluate, really, we believe that is some of the intent of the legislature. We want the process to slow down. That's what we're hoping that will be successful.
And to add to that, we're rolling out additional training in report writing and documentation, which is imperative under the new laws to protect the officers and ensure that they've gone through the steps necessary and to give them those skills. So, to the extent there's any learning curve, the chief and his staff are supporting the officers with that additional training.
Yep. Yeah, so we have, again, this is going to be quite a bit between now and the end of the year. But as Ms. Archer brought up, I mean, we are bringing, working to bring some experts on use of force reports so we can really think up to the legislature is expecting. We've got a lot more full tactical stuff on our INA 40 that we said. We have until 2028 to complete it, but we're going to work to try and get it done. At least, if not by the end of the year, by spring. It's important that that's going to take some new work. But really trying to focus with our staff on a regular basis, even if it's only 10 or 15 minutes a day, to start reinforcing these things and changing the way that we think.
Someplace we're likely going. It's probably going to get mandated upon us, and we're looking at getting in front of this and from a risk standpoint, to prove what we did do and what we didn't do. It's probably body cameras, give our police officers, and it's expensive and it takes people to manage and back records, control of records. But a settlement, because somebody were
My concern is appreciate the providing. But I'm more concerned about the person all on the street, they're calling, expecting a response. Some of those situations. It's not, instead, don't go out, instead, yes.
I think we're gonna need to take this segment of this meeting, put it front and center on our book.
I agree wholeheartedly. Why?
Yes, so.
I was just saying, my mind goes to a very high profile situation that took place, was it last week or the week before, between Maple Valley and Redmond.
Yes.
There was a professional football player that was in a crisis situation and did damage with his card, and there were people who were very, very afraid, and they had done everything they could to stop them. And what I'm hearing the chief say is the police had no way to stop it either. after July 25th. And what they did do was they used the police dog, and that was what finally
Yes,
detained the person. So the police dog is force, is that not correct?
yes, and actually, there's, part of one of the bills is going to create a work group to look at how canines are used. There had been reference early on in some of these bills to limit that significantly. There wasn't a conversation to say, well, tell you what, how do we press pause on this and start looking at it in the next session. But as you said, sir, body cameras are expensive, but we expect them next year. We are ahead of it. And we're buying.
I think
So what we have done already is we've met with our community advisory board several weeks ago, met the mayor in person. We've spoken to the community and to you tonight. I've also had a bunch of standing invites with other community groups, Rotary and all the others. We're waiting to have this public presentation first, and then we will go and speak to those individual groups. Depending on the response, how busy it suddenly becomes to me on Monday morning, we may do another town hall, and since we can likely do that first.
Well, certainly Rotary.
Yes, I've spoken with
Shoplifting, things like that, we can't pursue.
Well, and an example would be this year's proposal. Respectful time, but, you know, if someone goes down the dock and throws a chair through a window and it sits down on the floor, I do have probable cause for a crime, but I'm not going to go in there. We're not going to drag out this guy. The expectation now is that we spend as long as we need to spend the escalating thing. Well, that's going to affect their business.
Are you hopeful with sort of non-lethal restraint alternatives coming into development? I see these things that you hear about them, you know.
So, I haven't had a chance to talk with you, but we'll talk about this. Right? So there's another section of the law that deals with what's called military equipment. And one of those, we don't have, it's very specific on a number of things. Missiles, grenades, other things that we do not have and I've never seen anyone use. It talks about arms, drones, and I mean, certainly the legislatures are looking in the future, right? Those are things that the military has. They don't provide it to us. But that's the thing. One of the things that is stated in there is that firearms and ammunition, 50 caliber or greater, are prohibited. Now, what we believe is the intent of that is lethal ammunition. However, it doesn't specify. This is, I know we've spoken, and I've changed my opinion.
Speak to that microphone.
So, in conversations with regional partners and conversations with other members around the state, we have determined that we are going to remove our 40 millimeter less lethal launcher, which is a de-escalation tool, because it's something that will allow us to use a level of force that is below deadly force at a distance, with the goal being able to take a person into custody safely without having to cause significant, hopefully not cause significant injury, and certainly not cause a circumstance of deadly force. We're exploring some alternatives to the tools that we have now, but at this point, based on the language in the law, we believe that it is a wiser decision to not deploy those items. Even though the intent of the legislature has been very clear that we need to be using more de-escalation tools and less lethal tools, but because of the caliber of the ammunition and the fact that it is a firearm, it does not qualify for us to continue to field outside. Would you agree with that, Ms. Archer?
I do, with one caveat. As the chief mentioned, the intent of the legislature is not necessarily our guiding principle, because we can't necessarily interpret the intent. And I have also heard that it may have been intentional to prohibit this particular weapon for some reason for some of the legislatures. So it's unclear whether we will ever be able to reutilize this particular weapon, but it is clear that under the language of that particular act, that this type of tool is no longer available to the police department.
I might recommend that the presentation we give, you give it to the camera.
Yes, it did.
No.
Oh,
When we put on the website.
Sure.
We make a production of this presentation. For our web.
well, I'm glad I got in there.
Yeah. You and Janine can work the details out, but right there in front of that is pretty good and with PowerPoint.
All right.
And maybe we make a presentation that doesn't do that.
Do that.
So that's, we're done with our business items and we're to the good of the order. Jay, what you got for the good of the order?
Came back from vacation on Saturday. There wasn't anything in the refrigerator. So we came downtown for dinner. Place was hopping. It was great to see. People were in good humor. Had dinner. They had a lot of activities going on that day. Cornhole, I don't know if we're in it, involved this year or not.
I went to a different one.
Yeah, but
We're very well.
it was great to see, and people were in good spirits. So very positive.
Been hard to find tables.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Anything else for the good of the order?